human-level AI could realistically happen within 10 years, and it will almost definitely happen in the coming decades. And when it arrives, it will either be the best or the worst thing to ever happen to humanity to an incalculable degree. Here is what will happen to the world when human-level AI arrives. In order to fully understand the impact that human-level AI will have on the world, I want you to do the following exercise. I want you to close your eyes and visualize all of the technological progress that happened over roughly the past 100 years. Imagine starting with an old barren town, just like the ones you see in the Wild West movies. No electricity, no technology, nothing. Just buildings, dirt, and people. Then imagine the light bulb coming into play. Then the electrical grid. And then suddenly, this explosion of all these new inventions, the telephone, heating and cooling, cars, planes, TVs, modern medicine, skyscrapers popping up left and right, the computer, the internet, the smartphone, and suddenly, you're in the world that we live in today. Now, I want you to hold in your mind all of that change that happened over all of that time, and I want you to imagine that happening. Instead of over 100 years, I want you to imagine all of that change happening from start to finish in a single hour. In 1 fucking hour. That is how fast human-level AI will cause the world to change. And this wouldn't be for just 1 hour, of course. It would be hour after hour, with each passing hour resulting in exponentially greater compounded change than the previous one, irreversibly forever. And here's what this might look like over time. So on the x-axis, we have time measured in hours, and on the y-axis, we have what the fuck is happening measured by centuries of human progress in today's terms. So we've already showed what might happen in 1 hour of advanced, unrestrained human-level AI. And then in the second hour, you'd have double that amount of progress, so maybe something like 200 years of human progress in the second hour. In the third hour, you'd have 400. In the fourth hour, you'd have 800, and so on and so forth. And by the end of just one afternoon, the world would have already experienced the equivalent of 2,000 plus years of exponential technological progress into the future. And if you extrapolate this beyond just one afternoon to a day, week, month, year, etc., you can start to see that we're looking at a world that is progressing millions, billions, trillions of times faster than the world today, whatever that means. We're talking about a rate of change that far exceeds anything that we can even begin to comprehend. So that is the rate of change that AI could cause the world to easily undergo not long after AI surpasses human-level intelligence, and all without even coming close to brushing up against some of the limits of physics. And by the way, quick side note, the point at which AI passes HI is commonly referred to as AGI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. And again, there's a significant chance that the tipping point for AGI could really be as soon as only a decade or two away. Later on, we'll dive into some basic math to back up the claim that AGI could really cause the world to change as quickly as what we've been describing. But before that, what exactly in more detail is AGI, and where is AI today? This is the most important graph in human history. On the x-axis, you have time, and on the y-axis, you have intelligence. And then plotted are the trajectories of AI versus HI. Again, HI stands for human intelligence. Quick note here, many people will argue that HI is increasing and should therefore be represented as a line going up and to the right, and they're probably somewhat correct. But I would argue that the gains in HI are so negligible compared to AI that it almost doesn't matter. So for all intents and purposes, I'm displaying HI here as a horizontal line. So the intersection of AI and HI is AGI, but when this intersection happens in real life, it probably won't be anywhere near as clear as a single point on a graph like it is here, mostly because there isn't a clear definition for intelligence in the first place. So if we don't know what intelligence is, then we can't know subsequently what makes humans intelligent, AI intelligent, and so on. Furthermore, it's likely that AI doesn't need to have all of the components that make humans intelligent for it to surpass humans' overall intelligence, especially when you consider that AGI can be built in a multitude of different ways, not just one way. So for all these reasons, there is likely going to be some gray area where there is a lot of back and forth debate about whether or not AI is generally intelligent, human level, and so on, which you could maybe think of as being represented here by the height of the gray circle. One thing seems for sure, though, about this gray area. By the time everyone unanimously agrees that AI is more intelligent than humans, it will already be too late. So that's AGI in a bit more detail, but where is AI today? Today, AI is already better than humans at, number one, navigating unfamiliar terrain. You have self-driving car companies like Cruise, Waymo, others, who for the most part have already developed cars that are much safer than a human driver. They're just not mainstream yet, but they will be soon. You also have governments working on developing whole fleets of self-flying drones that can target and destroy their enemies. Pretty scary stuff. You might see that soon too. Number two, AI is also already better than humans at playing complex games. You have things like AlphaGo, an AI that was developed by Google DeepMind that defeated the world's best Go player about 2 years ago. For those of you who don't know, Go is a highly complex board game that has more possible moves than there are atoms in the universe and was previously thought to have required too much complexity and creativity for robots to beat humans at. Wrong. And you have AIs like this one developed by OpenAI, which is better than or on par with pretty much any human at extremely complex video games like Dota 2. By the way, these organizations, Google DeepMind and OpenAI, both have stated goals of building AGI. Number three, AI is also better than humans at impersonating a receptionist or even Obama. So you have AIs like Google Duplex that can impersonate a secretary so well that you literally can't tell it's not a real person when you talk to it. And then you have other applications of AI that can be used to straight up create video and audio feed of a person that is indistinguishable from the real person. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the things that AI can do today. And these applications use a combination of different technologies that are subsets of AI, things like machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning, and other buzzwords that we don't have time to fully explain right now. But the main point here is that these are all examples of narrow AIs, meaning that they are built to do specific tasks very well, but lack the sort of general intelligence that a human has that gives us the ability to learn and progress across virtually any domain. And so all of this begs the question, how close are we to AGI? So today, AI could be here, or here, or here. But the truth, though, is that nobody has a clue, including experts in the field. Humans are notoriously terrible when it comes to estimating when new technologies will arrive. But we do know the following. So today, there is real traction in AI, as we've shown. AI can already do a wide range of different tasks and jobs better than humans can. A massive chunk of the workforce is going to be replaced soon. These are not ifs, the technology already exists and it works. It just has yet to be rolled out. This traction will result in a positive reinforcement loop of investment in AI, then massive profits as jobs get replaced, then more investment, more profits, and so on and so forth, meaning that AI is here to stay and will only accelerate in its takeover of the global economy. Beyond all of this, technological progress in general tends to be exponential, and this seems especially true of AI since it is a force multiplier. Intelligence is the engine of all improvement and is upstream literally everything else, so radical gains in AI result in dramatically more compounded returns than typical technological progress. And it could be even steeper than an exponential curve. It could look more like a step function where you have sudden jumps up in the AI field as new breakthroughs happen. A good example of this is when AlphaGo beat the world's Go champion, a feat that happened 10 years sooner than most AI researchers thought it would. And on top of all of this, you now have a global arms race that is well underway, which will no doubt further accelerate AI as the race to develop AI branches out beyond the private sector and countries throw their full weight and resources into winning the AI arms race. And to that end, here are some quotes from leaders around the world on this. Whoever leads AI will be the ruler of the world. Vladimir Putin, September 2017. So Putin gets it. China unveiled a plan to become the world's leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. New York Times, Feb 2018. So China gets it too. So all of this will push us towards human-level AI much, much faster. And then you have many of the world's smartest tech visionaries making bold predictions on when AGI will happen. The probability that AGI will appear 30 years from now is around 80%. That's Sam Altman from earlier this year, March 2018, and he's the president of Y Combinator. He, Elon Musk, added his opinion that AGI will arrive in 7 or 8 years. That's from the Register late last year, and so this is Elon Musk's opinion. And a quick side note, I went to go investigate for myself to see whether or not people in the field actually believe these sorts of things, or if it was just a bunch of hype to try to attract more people into AI. And I personally talked to well over 100 people at institutions and organizations that are on the cutting edge of AI. And many of those people had very similar sentiments as Altman and Musk and others. And then, aside from timeframes for reaching AGI, you also have lots of very smart people who are issuing dire warnings about the possibility of achieving AGI. I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Once humans develop artificial intelligence, it will take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. So this is Stephen Hawking from about 4 years ago. Then you have Bill Gates. Bill Gates told Charlie Rose that AI was potentially more dangerous than a nuclear catastrophe. March of last year. Elon Musk again. Musk has repeatedly warned of AI being humanity's greatest threat, assigning it only a 5 to 10% chance of it being safe. But even if there's only a small chance of AGI happening anytime in the near term, the expected value of this is still unfathomable. So if you think that there's maybe a 10% chance of this happening in the next decade or two, like a lot of people in the field do, you have to multiply that 10% by the entire future of humanity. And so in the near term, it seems clear that we can't afford to not be prepared for these sorts of scenarios. And in the longer term, it seems all but inevitable that AI will surpass humans. In fact, if we assume any rate of improvement at all for AI, then it's only a matter of time before AI reaches AGI. And on that note, to top all of this off, and I think this is perhaps the most important point here, it actually doesn't even matter when AGI arrives or how far out it is. What truly matters is this. What matters is how far away AGI is relative to how long it takes us to find a solution for it that secures humanity's future. So for example, suppose that AI's trajectory charts us for reaching AGI in about 50 years. In this case, it might sound like we have plenty of time before AGI and don't need to worry about it today because it feels so far away. However, if the trajectory for finding a solution to safe AGI charts us for 100 years for finding that, then we have a huge problem on our hands. And right now, AI's trajectory is advancing at a clip, whereas the trajectory for figuring out how to ensure that AGI benefits humanity doesn't seem to be moving at all, much like what we see on the AI versus HI graph. And so if these two trajectories continue along at their current rates today, then we are no doubt charted for a total disaster ahead. So irrespective of timescales, it seems clear now that AI is racing up the AI curve towards AGI and far faster than our preparation for AGI is. In the opening, we talked at a high level about what might happen when AI gets close to or reaches human level. But now let's do a low-level dive and take a closer look at the details around what might happen when AI reaches HI. So first, we need a way to clearly define what intelligence is. We mentioned earlier that there isn't really a clear universal definition for intelligence, so I will put forth my own here. And then from there, we can quantify intelligence, measure the delta between HI and AI, track how quickly AI is advancing, how powerful AI can get, and so on. So my definition for intelligence is this: the ability to improve across domains. So the more intelligent something is, the better it can do this. All else equal, if one entity can improve faster in a given domain than another entity, then it is more intelligent. If one entity can improve at a given rate in 3 domains, whereas another entity can only improve equally as fast in 2 domains, then it is more intelligent. So intelligence would seem to be a product of how fast an entity can improve within a given domain and how many different domains it can improve across. So right now, narrow AIs can improve very quickly within a specific domain, but not generally across many different domains or all domains, which is what an AGI will be able to do. So we can say that a narrow AI is maybe more intelligent than humans in one domain, but we can't say that a narrow AI is more intelligent than humans across the board. Now, a lot of people might disagree with this definition, but this is the best proxy I can come up with for intelligence. And I believe that this is the entire point of intelligence in the first place, to improve across many domains. If this isn't the point of intelligence, then what is? So to further refine our definition for intelligence, I have found that intelligence can be actually boiled down to a very specific process. And that once you understand this process, it then becomes easy to quantify and measure how intelligent something is. So here's the process that I would argue underlies all improvement and consequently underlies intelligence. It's a 3-step iterative cycle. So first, you set a goal. Second, you make plans to progress towards that goal. Third, you execute those plans, and when you put your plans into action, as long as you're trying different things each time, you inevitably learn what works in practice, what doesn't, and you make improvements to your plans and your executions based on those learnings from there, and you keep running this iterative cycle again and again to keep learning, improving, and progressing towards your goal. This seems to be the process that drives new improvements in virtually any domain. And the reason the process is this way is that the unknowns far exceed what we do know. And if this weren't true, then there would be no need to iterate in the first place. We would have perfect information, we'd make perfect plans, and then we could accordingly hit every goal on the first attempt every time. But of course, that's not how the world works. There are far, far more unknowns than there are knowns. So given all of this, how do you quantify intelligence under this definition and process? Human years of progress in today's terms seems to be the most appropriate way to quantify intelligence. So then our benchmark would be equal to 1, meaning that humans today can make 1 year of human progress in today's terms per year, goes without saying. And then with that as our benchmark, it seems fair to quantify something that can make 100 times more progress than humans, again in today's terms, as being 100 times more intelligent than humans. So given our definition for intelligence, the process that governs intelligence, and our corresponding metric for intelligence, how much more intelligent might AGI be than humans? So revisiting the process that governs improvement again, but from the perspective this time of an AGI instead of humans, and using nice, easy, round numbers in our calculations, it seems fair to assume that AGI could plan at a minimum, bare minimum, 1,000 times more deeply than humans, and also 1,000 times faster. So right off the bat, we're already looking at AGI being able to plan and consequently improve 1,000,000 times faster than a human being. And then for the execution part, it seems, again, extremely conservative to assume that AGI could execute 1,000 times faster than humans and across 1,000 times more bodies, since AGI isn't limited to just one body like we are. So if you tally all of these advantages up, we're already looking at a form of intelligence that can improve at a bare minimum 1,000,000,000,000 times faster than a human. And because an AGI is software, it can easily self-replicate and coordinate across many, many different goals and sub-goals simultaneously. And so this calculation is the delta not just between an AGI and a human, but between AGI and the entire human race. So it doesn't seem unreasonable at all to expect AGI to improve, again, at a minimum, 1,000,000,000,000 times faster than the entire human race combined. And again, this is from using naively conservative assumptions in our calculations. These estimates, of course, don't account for the lag time that is involved when waiting for real-world results from these iterations. For example, even if something has godlike intelligence and iteration speed, if it's trialing something like a cancer drug, it may still have to wait for years in order to see what the full effects of the drug are before being able to iterate again. So this delay or lag time involved with waiting for results back from the real world could dramatically decrease our above estimates. But then on the other hand, we also didn't account for things that could have just as much or more of an effect in increasing the above estimates, such as AGI figuring out ways to work around these sorts of constraints or delays. Also note that this figure of AGI evolving at a rate that is 1,000,000,000,000 times faster than the rate of technological change today is actually far worse than what was described in the opening example. In the opening example, that rate of change was roughly 1,000,000 times faster than today's rate of change. So even by using the extremely conservative assumptions above that get us to an AGI that's evolving at 1,000,000,000 times faster than the rate today, we're already looking at something that is 7 orders of magnitude faster than what was shown in the opening example. And if you change some of the naively conservative assumptions that we've been using in our calculations to more realistic figures, such as AGI spreading to billions of devices instead of the 1,000x figure that we used, or the AGI thinking 1,000,000 times more deeply and faster than the 1,000x figures that we used again, then you're looking at a worldwide rate of change that is 20, 30, 40 orders of magnitude faster than what was shown in the opening example. And all without even coming remotely close to brushing up against any limits of physics. And unfortunately, that's still just the beginning, as AGI will almost definitely evolve itself into a dramatically more advanced form of intelligence at an ever-increasing rate, like what Stephen Hawking referred to earlier in his warning about AGI. So it seems that not long after reaching true AGI, that AI could quickly run away from us and evolve into something that is just unimaginably more intelligent and faster evolving than humans, which is typically referred to as artificial superintelligence, or ASI. And that will probably look something like the AI curve here approaching a vertical asymptote, or at least as far as humans can tell. Just to drive home how insanely large this delta is between humans and the sort of AGI/ASI that we've been describing. If you think of the gap as shown on the graph between 0 and the HI line, if you think of that gap being equal to roughly 1 meter, then the proportional gap between the HI line and AGI, assuming that AGI is 1 trillion times more intelligent and faster evolving than humans are today, that corresponding gap between HI and that AGI would be equal to 25,000 times the circumference of Earth, or roughly the distance between Earth and Saturn. So 1 meter versus the distance between Earth and Saturn. That is how big the intelligence gap would be between HI and AGI. That is how much faster AGI will be able to evolve than humans. And this again is from using our most conservative assumptions in our calculations. So trillions of years of human progress in today's terms, whatever that means, in a single year's time. That's how fast the world would change. And as we've explained, this gap could easily widen out to trillions of times this distance between Earth and Saturn. Trillions of times that distance, if we replace our conservative assumptions with more realistic assumptions in our calculations. And then that gap, the gap that's trillions of times the distance between Earth and Saturn, could explode out again to something that is countless of orders of magnitude bigger than that gap once AGI starts to radically improve itself beyond its early form. So 1 measly meter versus that distance is how much more intelligent and how much more faster evolving advanced AGI will be than humans. So in short, no human, no matter how smart, is remotely equipped to understand or even process the sort of intelligence and the rate of change that will result from AGI. So what does all of this mean for humanity? Well, it means that the arrival of human-level AI will be so momentous that it will easily negate everything else humans have ever done or ever will do. If we're able to harness and direct this immense power of AGI to our advantage, then we will very quickly solve virtually all other problems that we have today. But on the other hand, if we're unable to do this, then AGI will probably end disastrously for humanity. An immortal dictator, mass extinction, or worse. One way or another, we will decide our own fate. We will literally build God or the devil, our heaven or hell. So given the advent of AGI, what can we do to ensure that humanity has a bright future? Well, perhaps the most obvious option, if it's possible, would be slowing down the rate of AGI. So what if the rate of AI, instead of looking like a steep exponential curve as shown to the right, instead looked like this, a flattened curve with a rate of improvement that is dramatically less than today's rate? This, of course, could push back the advent of AGI by centuries, millennia, or more. However, since there is already an arms race underway, it would seem that there would need to be a centralized, tightly controlled coalition between nuclear superpowers to regulate the advancement of AI. And that seems pretty unlikely for the following reasons. So first, international relations are pretty tense today. No need to elaborate further on that. Second, the AI arms race has totally different dynamics than something like a nuclear arms race. There is no such thing as mutually assured destruction in an AI arms race. It's much harder to detect someone developing AI because it's software versus nuclear weapons. You need special materials. And finally, an AI arms race is the ultimate example of winner take all. A third reason for why this might be unlikely is that governments, and just people in general, tend to not have the kind of foresight that's needed to prepare for black swan events. With these sorts of events, people tend to be reactive instead of proactive. And in this case, the advent of AGI is the ultimate black swan event. There is no precedent whatsoever for what will happen when AI reaches or gets close to human level. and trying to deal reactively with AGI during or after the time it happens probably won't end well at all. So in short, AGI could easily happen much faster than the ability of extremely bureaucratic governments like the US's to get in front of the issue. But rather than defaulting to pessimism, let's at least explore what such a coalition might look like and how that might happen. Since although it is unlikely, it's not impossible and it might be needed. So it seems to me that for such a coalition to be formed, you might need at least some of the following things to happen. So one thing might be more visible and imminent threats of AI. If there were to be visible signs of extremely powerful and dangerous narrow AI that arose before AGI, perhaps that could cause citizens and governments to get in front of the issue. For example, it's not hard to imagine near-term applications of narrow AI, like autonomous drones or cyber warfare, causing tremendous damage or at least striking the fear of God in people, making AI a much more visceral and imminent threat to the average person, and maybe even triggering a massive backlash from citizens and governments to slow down the march of AI. And since groundbreaking technologies, more often than not, don't just happen out of nowhere, there's usually lots and lots of iterations until the technology actually works, just like how we described earlier with the iterative cycle. It seems plausible that such an event could happen before AGI, triggering all of the stuff that we just talked about. Another thing that could get countries to work with each other might be one country recognizing the gravity of the AGI problem before it happens, and then using its nuclear arsenal to pressure other countries to work together. After all, if you really think that the collateral from an AI catastrophe is worse than a nuclear catastrophe like Elon Musk and Bill Gates do, then it makes total sense to play this move if you believe that the world is on the precipice of AGI and there's no time or options left. Another path to an international coalition might be one country gaining such a decisive advantage in AI that it takes over the other countries and then slows down the rate of AI from there. But again, you have the balancing act problem here too. A country or organization would have to succeed in building AI that is so intelligent and powerful that it can literally take over the world, but not so intelligent that it could still be understood and controlled by its creator. And honestly, if this was the only way that I could know if this balance was achievable by attempting it, I just wouldn't. And aside from these things above, perhaps there are less trying paths to get to an international coalition. But I'm not getting my hopes up, and I wouldn't bet the entire future of humanity on this happening. So it seems like getting the nuclear superpowers to coordinate at this level would be fraught with many serious problems that would need to be overcome first. But let's just assume that everything we mentioned somehow got worked out and a successful coalition between nuclear superpowers was formed to slow down AI. Even then, this unprecedented coalition still wouldn't mean that AI would be slowed down for long. And here's just a handful of reasons why such a coalition might only still be temporary in the grand scheme of things. So number one, the agreement could openly fall apart between leaders and the coalition dies. Number two, everything might appear to be fine on the outside, but countries might be continuing to develop AI against each other in secrecy. Number three, maybe the world leaders actually do maintain an alliance, but secret to the public's knowledge, they continue developing AGI internally. Number four, of course, leadership always changes over time as people die and get cycled out, subjecting each subsequent generation to risks with new leaders. Number five, AI continues being developed outside the scope of this alliance because, again, it's much, much harder to regulate something like this than it is nuclear weapons, since it's really just software and the materials for it are readily available. So it might just be too hard to enforce to begin with. So it seems that any coalition is still very likely to be temporary in the grand scheme of things, and that AI will continue improving over a long enough time horizon, eventually reaching AGI. So in a best case scenario, if such a coalition is achieved, it seems that you buy some time with this. And in a worst case scenario, you aren't able to solve many or all of these problems, which buys you little to no time. Note that none of this is to say, of course, that buying time isn't a great thing. It totally is, and could make all the difference for securing humanity's future if it means that it buys us enough time to find a long-term solution to AGI versus not being able to do that. But at the same time, it also doesn't seem like this is something that we should rely on in the near term. And thinking longer term, this is not an actual solution. This is kicking the can down the road and buying time to find the actual solution. So even in the absolute best case scenario, we still need to find an actual long-term solution to AGI. So given all of this, what if we can't slow down AI indefinitely? What if we can't slow down AI for very long at all? If AGI is inevitable over a long enough time horizon, how can we still ensure that humanity has a bright future? So the most common answer to this today is aligning AGI with human values. But this also seems highly problematic for a number of reasons. First, there might not be such a thing as coherent human values in the first place. The topic of human values has obviously been debated for thousands of years, and nothing concrete seems to have emerged from any of that. But for the sake of continuing to think things through, let's just assume that there is such a thing as clear human values. Even if there is such a thing, it seems incredibly hard to ensure that AI will align with those values indefinitely. Even if we can control AGI, you're still subject to the people who control the AGI changing themselves over time. And would you trust anyone with this kind of power? Beyond that, it's basically a guarantee that our world, our way of life, and our values will change dramatically over time, as they always have throughout human history. So human values may very well be a moving target. And beyond that, of course, the AGI itself could keep changing and evolving, and almost certainly will because it's intelligent. And so any time that any of the above things change to the slightest degree, which they will, humanity becomes subjected again and again to misalignment with each respective change, reopening the possibilities each time for cataclysmic, existential, unintended consequences for the human race. And as a friend of mine likes to say, this isn't just rocket science, it's incalculably harder. Much like launching a rocket into space, if a single slight detail is off, the rocket explodes. And then with AGI, we're effectively launching humanity millions of years into the future, as we've described ad nauseum, and so there's even less room for error. The error for margin is 0. The passing grade is 100% flat, and the stakes are everything. And to top all of this off, if AGI keeps evolving, which again seems inevitable over time, it probably won't take long for AGI to reach such an incredible complexity and speed that it's well beyond the processing power of our brains, as we've described. And this would seem to preclude any of us from being able to understand, predict, control, align, or even process AGI as time goes on. So alignment seems extremely difficult in the near term, and is perhaps futile in the long term. So then, what are we left with for securing humanity's future? If we can only slow AI down temporarily, and we can only direct it towards something temporarily, both of which seem near inevitable over a long enough time horizon, then what options are left for securing humanity's future over the long term? Well, instead of getting frustrated with overly low-level, narrow solutions, let's try zooming our focus out to a broader level and re-examine what the true root problem is. So zooming out to a big picture view of things, the true root problem appears to be the rapidly widening gap between AI and HI, which I call the gap. More specifically, the gap is the divergence between the trajectories of AI and HI over time. This is the true root problem. And as long as this gap exists, we remain exposed to the same set of problems. So it would seem at a high level that the only way to truly secure humanity's future, if you can't slow down or control AI over a long time horizon, would be to figure out a way to close the gap. Ultimately, it is this divergence that gives birth to the massive and exponentially increasing power imbalance between humans and AI, and consequently every other problem that we've mentioned so far. But if humans had the same power as AGI, then every single one of the problems that we've mentioned so far would suddenly disappear. There would be no risk of a dictator, or runaway AI, or extinction. Value alignment wouldn't matter anymore, neither would slowing down AI or even controlling it, because humans would have the exact same power level as AI. And so then the question becomes, how do we close the gap? At a high level, there are really just two ways to close the gap. The first way is slowing down the AI curve, which we've discussed extensively at this point, and the other way is to radically upgrade the HI curve. And given that we've already shown that slowing down the AI curve isn't a long-term fix, it seems that the only option then is to radically upgrade human intelligence for as many people as possible to close the gap. So if you don't want to bet the entire future of humanity on us being able to slow down, direct, or control AGI indefinitely, then we must figure out ways to radically upgrade humans. Radical upgrades to HI have three huge benefits. First, they move the HI curve up, shrinking the size of the gap. Second, in addition to moving the HI curve upwards, they also make the curve steeper, accelerating the rate at which HI is improving. This is because improvements to intelligence are a force multiplier. You're improving the rate of improvement to the rate of improvement. And third, radical upgrades to HI make us much more equipped to better figure out how to solve the AGI problem, allowing us to see, understand, and solve aspects of the problem that we can't today. Again, intelligence is upstream literally everything else. And because the future is highly uncertain, and because we have no idea how much time we have until AGI, we must start pursuing a wide variety of different approaches to radically upgrading HI right away. So with that, here is the spectrum of approaches that we can start pursuing now to radically upgrade HI. A quick caveat here, before we dive into this, I'm sure that there are many, many other approaches that aren't listed here because either I or others haven't thought of them yet. So it's critically important for people to keep looking for new and better approaches beyond the ones that we're about to show. The slightest innovation can make all the difference. So this is the spectrum of ways to radically upgrade HI, ranging from low-tech approaches to high-tech approaches. At a high level, let's outline what these different approaches are. On the low-tech end of the spectrum, you have massive near-term gains to HI that can be had in areas like education and self-improvement via existing software capabilities or even no-tech solutions. After that, you have gains to HI that can be achieved by new and groundbreaking hardware that already exists today in its infancy and will become mainstream in the very near term. Things like augmented reality and virtual reality. Then you have considerably more advanced hardware that is further out and is more difficult to build, but could ratchet up HI significantly more once it arrives, such as brain-computer interfaces that aim to establish a seamless connection between your brain and computers. And then, even more difficult, more invasive, further out tech is things like neural prosthetics that straight up replace and radically enhance different parts of your brain versus a non-invasive brain-computer interface. Beyond that, there are things like genetic engineering, which opens up the possibility of creating entirely new humans from scratch, modifying the human genome to create superhumans that are orders of magnitude more intelligent and capable than humans today. Even more futuristic and high-tech than all of those things, you have the possibility of making digital carbon copies of the human brain and uploading them to the internet as you wish, which is commonly referred to as whole brain emulation. And finally, you have the possibility of assigning the task of upgrading HI to AI itself, either in the form of more advanced narrow AI or to AGI. So this is the high-level spectrum of ways that I've come up with so far for radically upgrading HI. Now, let's dive into each one of these approaches at a low level to take a quick look at how these approaches might help push the HI curve up and get us closer to closing the gap. So on the lower end of the spectrum, there appears to be a lot of room to upgrade HI in the areas of education and self-improvement. Whether it be improvement in goal setting, planning, execution, reflection, iteration, it seems like there are many ways to 10x or even 100x one's ability to iterate, learn, improve, and so on, and these improvements are completely within reach today. I can personally attest to this, having made many upgrades to my own frameworks for improvement over time, which have resulted in far faster progress for me by many orders of magnitude. A single upgrade to any one of the different parts of the iterative cycle we described can collapse years of progress into months or less, such as improvements like setting the right goal versus the wrong goal, having right versus wrong key assumptions in your plans, testing hypotheses quickly versus slowly, asking the right question versus the wrong question, removing mental and psychological blocks, and many, many more improvements. A single change like the ones above could result in easily 10 times greater, faster progress. And the aggregate of these changes can result in 100 times, 1,000 times, or more improvement to an individual's ability to progress. And then, on an organizational level, there is even further room for improvement to be made. Improving coordination and collaboration efforts within and across organizations is a form of superintelligence, enabling groups of people to make far more progress than any individual could make alone. So such improvements could result in orders of magnitude greater progress on a species-wide level. Some specific solutions for radically upgrading HI in the areas of education and training might include in-person or online alternative education programs, productivity software, and platforms that enable groups of people with shared goals to coordinate and collaborate better. Slightly more technologically demanding than improvements to education and self-improvement might be new advances to hardware that have the potential to radically increase HI. In particular, I'm especially interested in the areas of augmented reality and virtual reality hardware. I'm sure you already know what this stuff is, but AR is a digital overlay in the real world, whereas VR is a fully immersive virtual world. So here's augmented reality. And here are just a few quick examples of ways that AR could radically upgrade HI. One application might be AR annotating every physical object that we interact with in the real world and guiding us on how to master any sort of procedure in our day-to-day lives. For example, imagine learning how to play the piano or how to change a tire or do anything. If you had a digital overlay in your field of vision that showed you exactly what to do step by step in real time, that would dramatically improve a person's ability to learn virtually anything. Another exciting application of AR might be it enabling us to outwardly visualize, organize, and manipulate our internal thoughts with our entire visual range as our canvas. This would eliminate the need for us to hold and interact with information in our heads while we're thinking, dramatically increasing our effective working memory. And these are just a few examples. I'm sure there are many, many other applications of AR that could radically upgrade HI beyond these ones. And here are a few examples of how VR could upgrade HI. Allowing us to literally see the world through someone else's eyes, enabling us to experience something from many different perspectives and dimensions instead of just one. Allowing us to collaborate with anyone virtually just as if we were there with them in person. Eliminating all sorts of physical barriers that prevent the world's best minds from collaborating together across different fields and thereby spurring innovation much, much faster. So in short, new hardware that already exists and is in its early stages like AR and VR has the potential to radically upgrade HI even further. But one of the key challenges with this domain, aside from improving the hardware itself, will be making apps for the hardware that enable us to take full advantage of it. And that could take a lot longer. Next up, we have significantly more advanced and further out hardware that could radically upgrade HI, like brain-computer interfaces. Brain-computer interfaces are devices that aim to establish a seamless connection between the brain and computers. Go figure. There are already some successful BCIs that exist today, such as ones that can give paralyzed patients the ability to control fully functional robotic limbs just by intuitively thinking about how to move them, or other BCIs that can listen to and spit out words that you are saying to yourself in your head. Kinda scary. Many people are working towards developing both invasive and non-invasive BCIs right now at places like Kernel, Neuralink, and many labs in academia and other institutions. More optimistic people in the field seem to expect fully functional BCIs that can read from and write to the brain to arrive within the next 1 to 2 decades, effectively becoming an indistinguishable part of your thinking process. And some people, like Elon Musk, see this as being a way to radically upgrade HI and achieve some sort of a merge with AI. Although a seamless two-way connection between the brain and the computer could prove to be a game-changing boost to HI, there are some concerns around this. Health risks associated with invasive procedures, susceptibility to having your brain hacked, the potential for loss of agency or self, all sorts of privacy concerns, and unforeseen mental health issues. And much like we mentioned with AR and VR, there would also be a need for a whole ecosystem of new software and apps for this new hardware as well. And this is often the case for really any new dynamic hardware. One final thing to note in this section is that there are nearer-term, simpler BCIs, such as those that do transcranial direct current stimulation, which have the potential to radically upgrade human memory and focus as soon as 5 to 10 years from now. Aside from BCIs, you also have neural prosthetics, which are artificial devices that replace or take over some function of the brain. Some neural prosthetics already exist today in humans and animals, such as cochlear implants in humans. Neural prosthetics are different from BCIs in the sense that they completely replace or take over a part of the brain versus interfacing with it, although sometimes these lines are blurred. One interesting nearer-term application of neural prosthetics is radically upgrading human memory via hippocampal prosthetics, which Ted Berger from USC's neuroscience department has already successfully performed on rats. One advantage that neural prosthesis has over BCIs is that you are upgrading the hardware of the brain itself, versus making something that merely interfaces with the brain's hardware. However, there are many disadvantages as well. For one, the greater invasiveness means much more potential health risks, and as a consequence of that, much slower development of the technology. Much further down the road, probably after AGI, perhaps nanoscale neural prosthesis could allow for upgrading more complex parts of the brain, and maybe even someday all parts. Another prospect for radically upgrading HI is genetic engineering. The idea behind genetic engineering is to modify the human genome in such a way that allows for vastly more intelligent and capable humans. Some argue that through genetic engineering, super intelligent humans with IQs of 1,000 plus could be possible, whatever that means. Dramatic progress in this field with the advent of CRISPR-Cas9 and plummeting costs have made this into a viable near-term approach for upgrading HI. And here's a quick look at how CRISPR-Cas9 works. So Cas9 is an enzyme. Scientists have made an artificial modified Cas9 enzyme that can target, cut, and replace any component of a cell's DNA sequence with very high accuracy. So if you did this to create an army of superhumans, this would definitely be a massive force multiplier for humanity. One disadvantage to this approach is lag time. Even after you've cracked the code to genetic engineering, you'd probably still have to wait at least a few decades for these engineered superhumans to grow up, so this might not be a good approach for shorter-term AGI timescales. A quicker approach, though, might be cloning humans, which some believe could be doable within the next 10 years. We'd probably be a hell of a lot better off if we could just clone fleets of Elons and Einsteins and call it a day. Aside from modifying or copying human biology, there is also the approach of making digital copies of the human brain, which is commonly referred to as whole brain emulation. The thinking goes that if materialism is true, then why wouldn't you be able to make a digital copy of the brain? Currently, there's a lot of ongoing debate around the topic of WBE, around things like the feasibility of it in the first place, whether or not the structure of the brain is enough to achieve whole brain emulation versus the structure plus the functions of the brain, philosophical arguments about whether or not this is actually a form of upgrading HI, since they would be copies of you, although that depends on your definition of what you is, and timeframes for this look pretty far out. Most people who are optimistic about whole brain emulation still think it's 50 to 100 plus years away. So it seems like there's a good chance that AGI will happen before whole brain emulation is possible. And of course, like everything else, there are plenty of concerns around whole brain emulation as well. One is the worry that neuromorphic AI will happen before achieving whole brain emulation unless there is a centralized effort that attempts to do this with very tight controls. Another is the fear that uploads may not act anything like humans at all, even if they are perfect copies, perhaps for reasons like the mind-body connection turning out to be much more integral to the human experience than we thought. And then, perhaps the biggest concern, that if we do achieve whole brain emulation, it is effectively AGI, albeit one that is modeled directly off of humans, but it also might be harder to control than an AGI that we build from scratch. That said, there are some really exciting implications of whole brain emulation too. If achieved, we could in theory upload all of humanity to the internet, which might just solve the value alignment problem. Whole brain emulation also seems to be the preferred approach among many notable figures in the AI alignment community today, but again, only under the condition that it will be developed under a centralized entity with very tight controls to avoid accidentally making neuromorphic AGI. And lastly, the main constraint for whole brain emulation seems to be the computing power required to get a high enough resolution scan of the brain. The brain has 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion connections between neurons, so there's just a lot going on in there. And finally, perhaps our last hope for upgrading HI is AI itself. As we mentioned before, AI alignment generally pertains to aligning AI with human values, but what if AGI could be aligned with closing the gap? Could this be a solution to the alignment problem and the gap problem? Whatever the case may be, it seems clear that a prerequisite to aligning AGI with anything is figuring out how to get AGI to do whatever we want it to do in the first place. And today, there is a nascent field called AI safety that is working on figuring out how to get AGI to do whatever we want to do when we build it. And as a quick aside, this field is massively underfunded and understaffed given the gravity of this problem, especially when you compare AI safety funding to all the money that's flowing towards developing AGI. But there doesn't appear to be any consensus yet on what AGI should be doing, even if we can get it to do what we tell it to do. If directing AGI in such a way that it figures out how to close the gap for us is the answer to AI alignment, there are still many considerations that would need to be hashed out, such as, how does how the AGI is built affect how we should direct it? Since, again, AGI can be built in many different ways, not just one way. How much leeway do we want to give the AGI in closing the gap? Do we want to give it a wide open mandate and tell it to just close the damn gap? Or do we give it a specific procedure for closing the gap? Or something in between? How can we get AGI to control its rate of improvement, which seems to be critical in virtually any scenario? How do we get the AGI to let us change it if we make a mistake in how we build it? And many, many other considerations. It also seems that the event of achieving AGI, if it happens, will be so momentous that it could quickly erase all gains made in all of the other approaches to upgrading HI that we've mentioned. Therefore, it's probably still required to program AGI just right, irrespective of how much progress is made on the other fronts for upgrading HI. That said, again, because intelligence is upstream everything else, it's still critical that we pursue the other approaches mentioned for upgrading HI, as they could absolutely be critical for figuring out the actual solution to AGI. And then long before AGI, we should be trying to leverage narrow AI to the fullest extent possible to upgrade HI. It's also important to note here that there is often a blurred line between upgrades to AI versus HI. For example, when does an upgrade to AI count as an upgrade to HI? When does it not? These are hard questions with answers that are often unclear, but we need to continually reevaluate questions like this as both AI and HI are developed. And we also need to be careful about making sure that upgrades to HI don't backfire, causing AI to accelerate even faster. It seems though that regardless of how you classify upgrades to AI versus HI, we should definitely try to leverage any new AI technologies to upgrade humans as much as possible as AI advances. This could serve to dramatically accelerate progress in all of the aforementioned approaches for radically upgrading HI, and that could make all the difference. And so that is the spectrum of approaches for radically upgrading HI. And again, because the future is highly uncertain, and because we have no idea how much time we have to close the gap, and because intelligence is upstream literally everything else, we need way more people and way more capital tackling a wide variety of different approaches to radically upgrading HI. A single innovation could make all the difference, and the ultimate solution will likely be enabled by some combination or blend of the different approaches that we've described, plus new approaches that haven't even been thought of yet. So in the spirit of encouraging people to think hard and think independently about how to radically upgrade HI and ideally close the gap, I will propose in this next and final part of this series a very specific solution to closing the gap between HI and AI, which I believe solves the problem permanently and is not being pursued or discussed at all today. In this next and final section, I'm going to propose my own solution for how to fix the root problem, which I believe may be the only actual long-term solution. So circling back to the central problem, the gap, it seems that at a high level, the ideal solution would be one that completely and indefinitely closes the gap. Should it turn out that we can't meaningfully slow down or control AI for long, this may be the only actual high-level solution to fixing the problem over the long term. To illustrate why it's critical to find a solution that 100% closes the gap versus partially or even nearly closing it, and that does this over an indefinite amount of time, consider the following example. Looking at this graph, it might appear that the gap has been closed. You can even consider here that the intelligence levels of AI and HI are exactly the same at this given point in time. Let's just say that they're both equal to 1000x the intelligence level of HI today, which would be much, much further up the y-axis than what's shown here. So it might seem, in this case, that we've successfully closed the gap. However, this still might not matter and might not result in the gap being closed indefinitely, even if the intelligence levels of AI and HI were to be exactly the same for this point in time. And the reason for this is that the acceleration rates for AI and HI respectively could of course still differ a lot. So for example, the acceleration rate of radically upgraded HI at this point might be equal to 1,000, meaning that HI is accelerating at a rate of 1,000 human years of progress per year, whereas the acceleration rate of AI at this same point in time might be equal to 100,000, meaning that AI is accelerating at a rate of 100,000 years of human progress per year. Quick side note, I'm well aware that you could just change the scale of the y-axis on this graph to more easily see the difference in slopes between HI and AI for this point in time. But I prefer to illustrate this point with the scale that we're using here because the human brain has no ability to decipher in real time the delta between such rates of acceleration, although this delta still unquestionably matters with regards to humans being able to compete with AI. So even though HI here would be 1,000 times greater than what it is today, and equal to the same intelligence level as AI at this point in time, and accelerating at a rapid rate of 1,000 human years of progress per year, which would all be an incredible feat for humanity, it still wouldn't matter, because 1 year later, HI would then be evolving at a rate roughly equal to 1,000,000 times greater than HI today, whereas AI would be evolving at a rate of 100 million times greater than HI today because of its greater acceleration rate, assuming of course that the respective acceleration rates of AI and HI didn't change between t equals 0 and t equals 1. So despite this incredible feat by humans, we would effectively be back right where we started, with AI progressing 100 times faster than HI and breaking away at an ever-increasing rate that we'd probably never catch up to. So therefore, it's not only the relative difference between the levels of HI and AI at a point in time that matters, just as important or more important is the relative acceleration rates of HI and AI over time. So given all of this, things might seem hopeless in the event that we can't slow down or control AI for long. But alas, not all hope is lost. Even in a scenario where there is explosive AGI that we can't direct or control for long, there is still a way to close the gap. So again, how exactly do we ensure that the gap is 100% closed indefinitely? Well, perhaps we should try zooming in to an even deeper look at the root problem. Why exactly is it that we can't keep up with AI, resulting in the exponential divergence of HI and AI over time? As we alluded to earlier, perhaps Stephen Hawking best summed up the reason for why humans will fail to keep up with unrestrained AI. Human biology cannot evolve nearly as fast as AI, so we will be left behind in the dust. And this begs the question, what if our biology, our brains and bodies, could evolve as fast as AI? Would that solve the problem? And if so, how could we make that happen? I would argue that yes, this would solve the problem. If humans could evolve equally as fast as AI indefinitely, then the gap would be 100% closed forever, eliminating 100% of the risks that we've mentioned many times throughout this series. So then how exactly can we make this happen? Enter Theseus, a solution that will enable humans to upgrade equally as fast as AI, thereby closing the gap 100% indefinitely. This solution is inspired by the famous Ship of Theseus parable. In the story, there's a ship of Theseus that initially has one plank replaced, then many planks, and eventually 100% of the ship's components are replaced over time. The central question of the parable is it still the same ship? I'm not going to attempt to answer whether or not it is the same ship, but I will say this. The swapping out of the ship's components over time is basically what already happens to our own bodies today. With our existing biology, virtually all of our cells are swapped out and replaced over time, about every 7 years or so. So technically and literally speaking, you've already swapped out several bodies throughout your lifetime if you've been around for more than a few decades. It just doesn't feel that way. So what if we could take control of this biological process that already happens and swap out our biological neurons with artificial, radically enhanced neurons? If we can successfully swap out a single biological neuron for an artificial neuron, why wouldn't we then be able to swap out many neurons? Why not then all neurons? What if we could do this for not just our neurons, but for all of our cells, down to the nano level? If this procedure is possible, then we would be able to fully convert ourselves over into literal computers. From there, we'd be able to evolve equally as fast as AI, able to rapidly swap out and upgrade our smallest components with newer and better parts. The successful execution of this procedure would completely and indefinitely close the gap between HI and AI, thereby solving the central problem once and for all. This is the only solution that I can think of that actually solves the problem over a long time horizon, because humans would then have a substrate that can evolve equally as fast as AI. Of course, this is far beyond our means today, but if advanced AGI really can make millions of years of human progress in a short amount of time, and we can direct that AGI towards this specific procedure for even a short amount of time, then this starts to sound like a plausible solution. However, there are, of course, many concerns, such as, is this solution even possible? Would our consciousness remain intact? Would we evolve into something that isn't even remotely human? If AGI is advanced enough to pull this off, can we really control and direct it to begin with? But in my opinion, all of these objections are actually irrelevant. Because if we can't meaningfully slow down or control AI for long, do we really have any other option for ensuring our survival? Furthermore, is it better to not try to do this than to at least try? To not have the option to survive and evolve than to at least have the option. It's worth noting that most people I run this by intensely reject this solution, mostly because they fear what they might become. But I believe this fear is unfounded. First, there is no more reason to assume that upgrades will be bad versus good. Second, the procedure would be done in gradual phases versus all at once, allowing people to opt out and go back to their earlier form at any point if they don't like their latest upgrade. Third, it shouldn't be hard to reconfigure ourselves back to our original form if we ever wanted to, since again, we would be able to change ourselves however we want down to the nano level. Fourth, people should at least have the option to evolve, if it does come down to this. So in short, it seems like there's a ton of upside and no downside to having this option. It also seems like just about the best insurance policy that there is against AGI, should we reach that point. Again, if we are going to build AGI, we might as well try to direct it towards something. And why not at least make one of those things that we aim it towards be a very specific procedure that has the potential to ensure that the power balance between humans and AI is completely eliminated forever. Given all of this, it seems like the most effective thing to do today to actually see this through in the long term is to form an R&D organization comprised of experts from different fields like AI, neuroscience, biology, material science, and others, tasked with figuring out how to best direct AGI towards this specific end. There are a number of functions that such a group would be tasked with, such as preparing for a wide range of scenarios under which AGI could be developed, thinking about how much leeway to give AGI, giving it a broad versus a specific mandate, how to get AGI to do whatever we want it to do in the first place for as long as we can, how to instruct AGI to carry out this specific procedure, how to equitably distribute this technology to anyone who wants it, excellent strategic relations and PR, and many, many other considerations. Regardless of who ultimately develops AGI, it would seem prudent, if the assembled team is high quality, for the entity that is about to successfully develop AGI to absorb the proposed organization if they want to involve themselves and others beyond AGI. And then from there, hopefully the proposed organization would be able to help achieve the desired outcome for humanity. Even if there's just a 10% or even 1% chance of AGI being developed in the coming decades, it seems well worth for this organization to be formed ASAP. And there might only be months, weeks, or days to make the big decisions that will dictate humanity's entire future. So being extremely prepared early on for a wide range of different scenarios is critical, especially, again, since we don't know how far away AGI is versus how long it will take us to perfect our preparation for it. So to recap this series, we've shown that the advent of AGI is virtually inevitable over a long enough time horizon. Beyond that, AGI will almost definitely evolve into something that is incalculably more intelligent, capable, and faster evolving than the human race, ultimately beyond our control. Anything that can be done in the near term that significantly slows down AI or upgrades HI increases humanity's chances of flourishing in the long term. And finally, it seems that the only actual long-term solution to all of this might be directing AGI towards upgrading humans to such an extent that we can evolve equally as fast as AI, thereby permanently eliminating the gap and enabling humans to direct their own evolution. So in closing, because the future is highly uncertain, the stakes are everything. The margin for error is zero. We have no idea when AGI will happen or how long it will take us to find an effective solution. We must start pouring at once as much talent and resources as possible into a wide variety of different approaches that work towards slowing down AI and radically upgrading HI. And at the same time, we must avoid, at all costs, resorting to our primal default modes of complacency and groupthink. We must instead think and act proactively as individuals. We must fully embrace diversity of approaches to solving the problem, especially when these approaches or their purveyors are considered socially unacceptable. Major breakthroughs, more often than not, come from ideas that are unexpected, weird, controversial, uncomfortable, scary, laughable, seemingly unbelievable, or even outright defy sacred social norms that authorities and experts declare to be beyond questioning. But a single person, a single idea, a single challenged assumption can make literally all the difference. And nobody, including myself, has a monopoly on the truth, or even a sliver of the whole picture. Only by wholeheartedly adopting the mentality described above can we even stand a chance of getting at the actual truth, and consequently finding solutions that accurately reflect reality and will actually work in practice to ensure that humanity's future is secured. The fate of humanity, our unfathomable advancement, or our extinction, will ultimately be decided by the ability or inability of individuals who are intelligent, independent thinking, open-minded, determined, and above all, courageous to rise to the challenge and act now. The entire future of the human race literally depends on these things.